This is the Collector Car Podcast, the home for the auto enthusiast. Join Greg Stanley as he applies over 25 years of insights and analytical experience to the collector car market. He will interview the experts and throw in some fun stuff as well.
Do you find it challenging working on your collector car? Advantage Lifts has the solution for you with their selection of 2- and 4-post lifts. Advantage's 2-post lifts provide an unparalleled amount of versatility. Each wheel can spin freely and be worked on individually, and you'll have full access to those hard-to-reach parts of the undercarriage. And best of all, Advantage's 2-post lifts are ready to ship now. Get $100 off by using code TCCP for the Collector Car Podcast. Again, that's TCCP. You can find your perfect Advantage lift by calling 763-300-5730. That's 763-300-5730. And don't forget to use the promotional coupon code TCCP. Hey, it's Greg Stanley. If you're listening to this podcast, you know I love everything automotive. This passion has expanded to include being a car specialist consultant for RM Sotheby's. So if you need assistance buying or consigning a collector car at any one of our online or live auctions, including Scottsdale, Amelia Island, or Monterey, you can reach one of our car specialists at rmsotheby's.com, or you can email me directly at gstanley@rmsotheby's.com. Well, welcome to the Collector Car Podcast. Hey, it's Greg Stanley. We are digging deep into Monterey sale, and there's a ton of Ferraris coming our way for the big August sale. I did the math, and the low estimate on these cars is $103 million, and that's just the Ferraris, up to $126 million. So I wanted to talk about this, but I know sometimes you get tired of my voice, so I invited a Ferrari expert. I'd like to introduce Tom Young. Tom, how you doing today?
Good. How are you, Greg?
Good. It's great to have you on. We've met a couple times on the concourse field, and I know I love Ferraris. I'm becoming a Ferrari expert somewhat on the 275s, but I know you're an expert on a lot of these other ones, and we can see in the background there, you got some cool cars. So why don't you tell us a little about what you do with Ferraris and the entire Ferrari world?
All right. Well, I started this as a newbie. I guess everybody starts with Ferraris as a newbie, and overnight I've turned into an old timer, I guess, because the car behind you here. Let me flip this camera around.
Sure.
It kind of started the whole thing. Was this 330 America? So I found this car 20 years ago in boxes and pieces, and just like everybody, I want a Ferrari. What's it going to take for me to get a Ferrari? And I found this thing for sale, and it was a part, and I had a mentor teach me how to put it together, and that's it. Kind of did this, and through the process that I thought was only going to take a year, which took 8 years to put this together, I kind of fell in love with working on these cars, and I decided to quit my day job and do this for a living and work on Ferraris. I mean, my mentor ended up being my boss, and we worked together. We still do through the years as he's gotten older. I'm doing more of it by myself, but still collaborate with him. He's down in Connecticut. His name is Francois Sicard, and nowadays I'm doing a lot more of it in upstate New York, a couple hours north of New York City. So what I do is I kind of tore a page out of his book, which is just deal with only vintage Ferrari. We joke about it. It's like if it's got a carburetor in it, then I'll work on it. But if it's got anything else, it's usually better to have somebody else work on it. But it's just all I do is vintage Ferrari. So what I have in the shop is anything from a restoration, paint job. Like that car is just a 4-headlight car that's just a tune-up and a service. Then I have cars that are in from paint. I'm doing the reassembly and putting it all back together. You put all the chrome and the lights, and eventually this will go down to my upholsterer and put the interior back together.
Wow.
I've got another car that's here, same situation. So it's kind of like a one-man show. I'm trying to keep everybody happy, but I'm sure everybody in the business is just busy, and for instance, like this Lusso is going to be out in Monterey. It's going out for the Casa Ferrari event. So I'm kind of taking care of it. Eventually it's going to get on a truck and head out to, you'll if you go to Monterey, you'll probably see this on the lawn at the Casa Ferrari event.
That's amazing. That's a great color combination on that Lusso. And real quick, because I don't think I've ever seen it, what color is on that Dino?
Oh, so this Dino is, I think the owner picked the color. It's not really, I believe it's like a Fiat color. It's not really I think he picked it. It was
okay.
Just, and I didn't paint the car. So it came to me because it just needed mechanical service after he had it painted. It just wasn't running right after they did the body work. So it came to me, and I got it kind of tuned. And I hate to say it, I've probably driven this car more than the owner has in the last couple of years because it just hasn't had time, and it's been, kind of staying here. So I've been trying to keep it exercised and stuff. A lot of these guys, what they do is they'll send a car to me, and the thing is, life gets in the way. We had COVID, and all of a sudden the car ends up not going anywhere, and then I end up stuck with it. So, you carbureted cars, you kind of have to drive them and use them, or else they get worse.
Yeah,
So
that's tough, man. I got to drive this Ferrari this afternoon. It's part of the job.
It sounds so bad, but like most of us who do this, we always complain because, I probably have 3 or 4 cars in here that have to be driven. And then my car, I don't get to drive my car. And now I'm taking this car up to the Ferrari event up in Monterey. I heard you're going, or you're going to try to go.
I can't make it, unfortunately. It's horrible. Okay, I don't know if you know this or not, but I'm a Mustang guy. So
okay,
I just got to look at that little 65 fastback back there for a second.
Yeah.
That looks nice.
I've had this car since '91. I've had this car for a long time. It was I used, when I was in high school, I had a coupe, and just a plain Jane C4 automatic coupe. And when this thing came up, I was like, I'm going to spend the same amount of money fixing my coupe as opposed to a fastback. This is a 4-speed fastback. So I sold the coupe and bought this, and it's been great. I mean, I love these cars. This car is like an old leather jacket. I mean, you just put it on, you take it out, drive it. You can fix it with a pair of pliers and a screwdriver. I mean, it is so simple. And then the ironic thing of that, because when I compare that Mustang with a Ferrari, they're like the same car, kind of. Like when you think about it, front engine, rear drive, 4-speed transmission, live rear axle, a couple hundred horsepower or thereabouts. And it's just interesting how like these were built at the same time.
Yep.
But then at the same time, like this Mustang at 80 or 75, 80, air gets underneath it. It starts to like wave and, it starts to get a little loose. The Ferrari at like 85, it starts to settle in. And then all of a sudden it'll do 100 and it still will be rock solid. So like you really start to compare like the differences. The Mustang is super fast, 0 to 60. But then once it gets above 70 or 80, it's kind of like out of its element, But I love the car. It's great. I mean, it's just so reliable. It's the most reliable thing. I mean, I never have to fix it. I just, put gas in it and drive it.
Yeah, I love the American Racing wheels on it. Those, what are they called? Torque Ds? I don't know.
Yeah,
but
the Torque Thrust Ds. Yeah, they're just. I wanted the car. It's not like a bullet car because everybody has the 67s, but the or the 68s rather, but it's kind of like homage to like I didn't hot rod it, but I made it into like this is what you would have done. You would have lowered, because I lowered it to Shelby specs. I put the stiffer springs in the back, and it drives so well, and of course I hopped up the motor a little, put aluminum heads on it, so real easy to make them fast, just fast enough to feel like you should be cruising the high schools with them.
Well, this is an episode all about Ferrari, so I will tell you
sure.
I'll tell you my Ford Fastback Hypo story after our interview here.
Sure. Well, I'm sure you and I, as always, we get together. We can talk about cars and all sorts of stuff. And although I work on Ferraris for a living, I love all cars. I mean, I got all sorts of stuff. My collection is, this is the one Ferrari that's in my collection, but certainly, the Mustang's mine. I also into Porsches. So it's like, I think we're just into cars.
Yeah, we are totally. Yep. Well, let's go over. I know you put together a list of 5 or 6 Ferraris. I just basically said, hey, pick something from our Monterey list that you would like to talk about and, go from there. So I know you did not necessarily talk about the big $25 million 410 Sport Spider, which is fine because we'll cover that on another episode. So
sure.
If you would kind of give me your list, or let's go through your list and
let's do this.
I'll ask my newbie questions.
Absolutely. I mean, I looked at the list and, as always, Monterey has like every Ferrari you could think of. So, I mean, it's quite a list. And I kind of stuck away. I kept away from the really high dollar stuff because it's like, who can really afford? I mean, what's high dollar, right? Everything's like six figures now. So we're talking like multiple 7-figure cars. I mean, I love them. I think they're fantastic, but like, honestly, they're kind of out of reach. So what I looked at, and they're starting to get expensive. My first one on the list, I guess if we went to the first choice, would be the F40. I don't think there is like any question about an F40 being one of the coolest cars right now for so many reasons. Everybody's talking about them. The last car that's like no traction control, crazy gonzo turbos, they come on and you just got to hold on. I have a customer of mine that I was talking to about 3 years ago, and I was like, "You gotta buy an F40. I mean, I know they're $1 million, but you gotta trust me. They're going to take off. They're the best."
Yeah.
And we actually went and looked at a couple of them, and he just couldn't really do it. He just like, it's a little much. And I kept saying, God, these are such great cars. And I had the pleasure of driving them because I went out and checked a couple of them. I went out to California to look at one. I was out in Philly to look at one. And so every time I drove another one, I was just like, oh my God, like this is exactly what I've been saying. And he just couldn't do it. And now today they're 2.2,
Yes.
they're 2.2 and more. I mean, I have a customer of mine that just bought one, and he's like, I was sweating it when we had to close the deal. And I'm thinking, are we overpaying for this car? Did we just spend the most money anybody's ever spent on an F40?
Right.
Literally 3 months later, he's like, did you see how much you're selling for now?
Yeah.
It's like, I want to take credit for it, but there was times that I was really sweating. Like, did I advise him to spend too much money? And now we're like the smartest people in the room,
Yeah.
So,
and I know we don't have all the specs for the cars yet that are selling. We just know that there's a really pristine F40 coming to Monterey. And to your point, I had a client that was didn't want to spend over $990. I don't know why that was his number. And that's when they were 1.1, 1.2. And I'm like, that boat sailed. And what's ironic, ours is 2.5 to 2.9. So it's on the upper end there. And I think it's a pretty low mile car.
Well,
and
the
I was
trick of the F40s. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was just going to say, I was in a collection and I saw one that was pristine. The fabric seats were great, which is hard to find in one of those F40s. And it only had 1,400 miles. And I thought, wow, that's incredible. Then, 3 months later, I saw one that was bought new and only has 400 miles on it. So there's still a few unicorns out there. So when you think,
the thing that drives me nuts about these F40s is that, one of the reasons why they're so great is because they're unbelievable to drive. And yet we're celebrating the fact that they have like the one that I just got had 5,000 kilometers on it. And to me, it's like, wait a minute, we're celebrating the wrong thing. We're celebrating the fact that nobody drove this car.
I know. I would drive the heck out of it.
Oh my God. I have stories that I'll tell you later, but test driving these F40s. And of course you're trying to be respectful and everything, but you kind of have to get on them to see if they pull strong and then they're not, shaky or any of that crazy stuff. But man, when those turbos come on, it is just unbelievable. And the other thing I was going to say, and we can talk about F40s forever, but I'll try to make it short. But the F40, there is nothing on the road that you are going to be mistaken for in anything but an F40. There is nothing. You can't be mistaken for anything else. There's nothing that has that angular wedge shape. Nothing has the tail that high. I mean, F50s have that 90s look with the gumdrop shape, and there's shapes about the F50 that are kind of like in other cars. Because a lot of other people like Jaguar XK220s had that like look, that nose, the shape, the round headlights, or the curved edges. You look at other cars that are supercars. McLaren F1, okay, that's a specific shape, but a lot of cars sort of copy that. No one's copied that F40.
Yeah.
Like there's nothing else that says, oh, they took that from the F40. They took those NACA ducts and put them on this car. No one did it. So you're gonna drive a car in which when you show up to anything, there is no one's gonna say, is that a 288 GTO? Could be a 308. Is that it just doesn't look like anything.
Yeah, you're right.
That's another reason.
And I actually find it a beautiful car. I like it more than the F50. I like it more visually than the Enzo. I don't know. I like that 288 GTO, but you have a good point. It does look a lot like the 308.
But nothing looks like the F40. I mean, nothing has that drop nose that goes all the way down and those pop-up. I mean, obviously, nobody makes pop-up headlights. So you're really locking yourself into such a different car that no one follows or looks at. So I think it's really, and it's just crazy. It's stupid. It's like the wing is huge. The craziness of the thing. There's
plexiglass.
So it's a great car. So okay, so let's move on. So the second one is kind of going the other direction, which is the 1965 yellow, the short nose 275 GTB. They're four cams and they're long noses, and everybody. I like the short nose cars. I mean, we could get into the specifics because I work on this.
Describe for our listeners who don't know the difference. I mean, it sounds obvious, short nose, long nose.
Sure.
Describe that for our.
Absolutely. So it kind of goes back to the whole thing is like the first Ferrari the first 275 GTB they came out with was a short nose. So it had a larger grille, and the nose was a little shorter. And through the design, and they realized that there was high speed lift. Like when the car was going above a certain amount of miles per hour, they felt that the car was air was going in through the open nose, and it had the tendency to lift the car a little bit. So what Pininfarina did was they designed the next generation of that 275 GTB was they lengthened the nose, made the snout smaller, so there would be a less air, the pressure area would then move, so the nose wouldn't lift as much at high speed. Okay, I get it. That's what racing is about. You definitely make design changes and all that other stuff. But like, when was the last time you drove at 100 miles an hour? Right. I was looking at like people who have like when I was really into Porsches and I had a 72 911 that I put like an S air dam on it, and you put the ducktail on it and you start making it into an RS replica. Well, the reason why you got to put that air dam is because, above 90 miles an hour, you have high speed lift, and you got to have the ducktail in the back to keep the rear end down. And then like you started thinking about it, it's like, well, wait a minute. Like, we don't drive 100 miles an hour every day. So why do I care if the front end lifts? It's like the only time I've ever felt the front end get light was on the track. So I did that to my car when I tracked it. But like, honestly, are you going to drive a long nose 275 GTB and say, oh yeah, I'm sure glad I'm driving the long nose because it doesn't lift at high speed? A 275 GTB short nose, I think personally, is a prettier car. It has the grill. The grill hasn't gotten really narrow. And it, because they got it so small that you can't even put the Cavallino inside the grill. I mean, to me, a vintage Ferrari, the whole deal is that grill with the Prancing Horse on the egg crate grill. Well, the 275 got rid of that because they made the grill so small. You can't even put the, to me, it's not like I care about bling, but it's a design thing that says Ferrari. And there's a couple of other things mechanically that are different. They made upgrades. They went to a torque tube on the long noses, which tied the transmission and engine. But those are things that you can make a short nose mechanically better. It's not like, to me, a deal killer. Some people say, oh, well, it's got an open drive shaft. I'm getting too technical, but it's like, but you could, if you know how to fix it, you could fix it. It's not a deal killer. Got to have a long nose. I mean, yeah, the best one to me personally, mechanically, is probably a long nose 2-cam torque tube car. Because it's easier to work on and good power. It doesn't need to be a 4-cam. 4-cam, people love the 4-cams because they spin higher and more horsepower, but that's a lot more mechanical complexity.
That's true. And for our listeners who may be listening to this audio only, if you go to YouTube, I did put up some pictures of the difference between the long and short nose so you can see exactly what Tom is talking about. Yeah. All right.
Sure.
Well, let's move
the next
to
one.
Yeah.
Let's see. So the next one I have is a 275 GTS. It was again, I'm sorry, guys, I'm sticking to vintage Ferraris, but it's kind of like what I know and what I love. 275 GTS is kind of like it came out the same time as the short nose 275 GTB. It was the convertible version of it. It's not as pretty as, let's say, a 330 GTS because they made that look more like a GTC. The 275 GTS, people have accused it of looking like a Fiat 124 and certain things like that, but it's still a pretty Ferrari. It's still a convertible. It's a V12. Convertible Ferraris I give a little bit of a pass to, simply because I think the top down changes the whole character of the car. It's like okay, so it doesn't handle as well. So what? It's a little cow shake and all that other stuff. But it's a convertible. You can't have a conversation above 70 miles an hour on any vintage Ferrari convertible. So what difference does it make? You're not going to be ripping up the back roads, at 80, 90 miles an hour. It's a convertible. That's the whole point. So just a pretty car. They're all 60s cars have that really pretty, amorphic shapes that move, not the angular stuff that came out later on. So it's a prettier shape. So that would be my pick for the 275 GTS.
Yeah, and let me just cover. We have 3 275s in the sale, and I just want to go over the estimates on these so our listeners get an idea. Let's see, the 275 GTB from 65, the estimate is 1.8 to 2. The 66 275 GTB C, that's a big dog car. That one is 7.5 to $9 million. And then the 2.5 GTS is 1.7 to 1.9. So does that sound about right with?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, if you do this long enough, we all have stories about when they were a lot cheaper.
Yes.
So I don't know if they're going to keep going up, but they seem, to track the trend that the slope is always rising.
Yeah.
They may dip a little bit, but I have great stories of customers of mine says, we should go take a look at this 275 GTS. And I was in Westchester, and I went and looked at it, and it was the rockers are rusty, and I said, I remember having, and we laugh about it today when we recall that conversation. Like, for $165,000 and it's got rusty rockers, I think that's bullshit. You should never buy that car, because it was. We laugh at it. It's like we passed on a 275 GTS because it was $165,000.
That's crazy.
And it had a
right?
little bit of rust in it,
Yeah.
But who knew? I didn't have $165,000, or else I might have thought about it. But,
Right.
it was all the money. Okay, so moving on. So it's kind of in the same ilk as the 330 GTC.
Okay. Yep.
Coupe. It's a 330 engine, 4-liter V12. I think that the 330 GTC it's a pretty car. It's not as beautiful as a 275 GTB. It is, GTBs just have this really, beautiful shape, but yet has this aggressive stance, and it really has this feel of the racetrack, because it has the camtail from gives you that all that racetrack technology of the 60s. But the 330 GTC is more of a gentleman's car. It's kind of like I look at it like just a gentleman that has good taste, good power, good torquey engine, has a transaxle. So it's very similar to a 275 GTB in layout, front engine, transaxle car, gated shifter. But it's a little bit more conservative in look.
Right.
It's not voluptuous. It has a really good greenhouse outward view, so you have really good visibility out of the car, and it's understated. It doesn't really attract attention. I think sometimes certain Ferraris, even to people who don't know anything about Ferraris, when they see a 275 GTB, or in that matter a Dino, somehow people are attracted to them just simply from they've never seen that shape before.
Or that
in my
Lusso,
shop,
your Lusso behind
exactly. Yeah, like this. I mean, in my shop, I'm in a steel building where there's some people next door who don't know anything about cars, and occasionally, they'll wander over, and they might not know anything about cars. And I actually like that, because we talk cars all the time. We see, it's like, oh boy, here's another Ferrari. I see them all day. I have to have that step out of that perspective, and I'll get people to come in, and every person that comes in that knows nothing about Ferraris somehow stop by the Dino, because It is a pretty car, because it has a shape that just that combination of height, length, and the curves on it just universally attracts people. And so, I find that you have to think back to what it's like to see it from a different perspective. But on a GTC, it's not as voluptuous, but yet it has all the stuff to it that makes it a great Ferrari. The 2-cam engine, really easy to work on, good transaxle car. It's got better brakes. The 330 GTC, if you really want to compare it to a 275 GTB, the 330 GTC has better brakes than the two. If you could take a 275 GTB and put GTC brakes on it, which is possible, it make it a better car. 275 GTBs have the old Dunlop brakes. I mean, literally like months apart, and they put better brakes on the GTC, and it stops much better. I mean, much better than a 275. But I don't know if it's because people don't drive them and compare them. But like, to me, I drive them all the time, and yeah, you definitely feel the difference in the brakes. I haven't tracked them. But if I could feel the difference on the street, there's a big difference. But hey, listen, people have hung their hat on a couple $1 million car. They're not going to poop your brakes, So, but if I had the comparison, I've actually seen the comparison of the two. Dunlop brakes are kind of flaky, because the way they're designed. They've certainly come a long way with modern brakes.
So, and now this one's actually a little bit more affordable. So if I've got this right, let's see, 1967. The estimate on this one is 500 to 600.
Yeah, so, and they're down. I mean, I think honestly, I think a 330 GTC is a pretty good buy right now, because at the 5 years ago they were selling in the sevens. So 330 GTCs. It's not that I don't understand. I think the market's gotten a little soft, but there's certain cars, everything kind of like moves and catches up. And right now I think the 330 GTC is a little slow to catch up. Things are starting to move up again. There's a little blip in the market. Things kind of got, came down a little bit, but the GTC, as far as a car is concerned, as far as a good value, and I'm not even just trying to sell them. I think I don't know why they're still in the fives,
right?
Because they were in the sixes and the sevens, really good ones. And then the 365 GTC, which is the rare last model, whatever, I forget what, 50 of that, but whatever, with the bigger engine. Those things at one point were pushing, we were looking at them at the height of the market about 5 years ago. We're like, are they going to push into $1 million? Because they were selling for 850
right,
and 900,000. So we were just like, wow, is that GTC going to push into the $1 million? It never did. I don't think they did. They were close. They were like 9.5 for the really expensive, beautiful, restored ones. But I don't think they got that kind of money.
Right.
But so GTC, if they one time were up there in the sevens, why wouldn't they go back there again? They're good cars. It's not like they're, because that's a big question right now among vintage Ferrari owners that we're all having this discussion, is like, are vintage Ferraris going to become like the Duesenbergs and all those pre-war cars that all the owners are not like, I hate to say it, but they're aging out, and there's nobody carrying them on. Nobody's going to pay you $500,000 for a car that you can't just drive on the street. I can't imagine. Look, I mean, as much as it's nice and everything, I don't want to jump in a Marmon and go and drive into town. I mean, as beautiful as that is, it's just not me. So the big question is, are these vintage Ferraris, are they turning a corner where like everybody wants an F40, everybody wants an F50, everybody wants a McLaren, but everybody's like, oh, those 330 GTCs are antiquated. And that's been a big discussion among us, seeing is what's going to happen in the market. And I look at it and I kind of disagree, because I'm not saying that everybody wants one, but they still keep up with traffic. They still stop. They still go. They're not like out of the way. They're not oversized like the pre-war stuff where they just don't equate. So I still think that they're going to keep with the market, and especially, and this is the big other discussion that we're having, is what's going to happen with gasoline? Are we no longer going to be able to run these cars?
Yep.
But like, my feeling is, I would buy one now and drive the wheels off of it, because I want to be that old timer where people say to me 20 years or whatever, how many years, whatever you want to believe, where they's like, wait a minute, you took these cars and drove them 100 miles on the road? Like, if we miss this window, if let's say it's true and they do ban gas or they do ban it and it ends up being private racetracks, all this stuff, I want to be able to tell those stories. I drove these cars.
Oh, yes. Yep.
In
absolutely.
The golden age, the very end of it. What are you waiting for? Like, what are we waiting for? What if they just pull the carpet out from under us and we don't? If they don't, we'll still have these cars and we'll still be able to drive them.
Right.
Like, I want to be able to tell my grandkids how cool it was to drive these cars.
Right.
I want to be their hero. So that's sorry to get off on a tangent, but
that's fine. So that was the 1967 Ferrari 330 GTC. What's next on your list?
Yeah. So the next one is a 365 GT 2+2. So otherwise known as the Queen Mother. Not the Queen Mary, who I've heard people call Queen Mary. They got it mistaken. The Queen Mother comes from, I think somebody in one of the trade mags wrote, it's the mother, or the Queen Mother of all Ferraris, because it was so big.
Okay.
And so that phrase kind of stuck with the car. It's a big 2+2. It's a late 60s. I think the one that you guys had is 69 or something like that. They built
we actually have
like
two of them, 69 and 70. Yep.
Okay. Yeah, so they're great GT cars. I mean, they, through the years, the 330 America that's in the background, which is basically a 250 GTE, was the first production 2+2. Ferrari knew that was their bread and butter. I mean, they sold more of those cars. I mean, for instance, that 330 America that you see with the GTE production, it's probably made 1,000 of those cars. The Lusso 350. I mean, that's what they made. Like the GTCs or 300, they were always like 350 cars, but the 2+2s, they made thousands of them like this. So that model, they sold 1,000. Then basically the next model, the 330 2+2s, they sold 1,000 of those, and then the 365. I mean, people say that the 2+2s funded Ferrari's Formula One, racing, because they sold, 3 times as many of those cars than any other two-seaters. And they were the same price. I mean, if you walked into a dealership in 1964 and you wanted to buy, you buy a Lusso or you buy a GT, they're the same price.
Oh,
And
wow.
it's just like today. You go into
Yeah.
a Ferrari dealership, you want to buy a two-seater or the FF or any of the 2+2s. They're the same price as a two-seater V12 two-seater. So it was a choice that you made. It wasn't like, well, sometimes Ferrari will make you buy the 2+2 first before they put you on the list for the two-seater, but that's a whole other story. But honestly, they're the same price. So as far as back in the 60s, when they made these 2+2s, they just made them a little bit bigger and bigger and bigger because they were kind of like GT cars. They were comfortably seat 4 people, air conditioning. The 365, the reason why I like them, I think they're still relatively affordable. They very comfortable. They have air conditioning. They have power steering. They all came with air conditioning. They all came with power steering. They came with vented front rotors, big, heavy rotors that stop the car really well. And they're comfortable to drive. I've driven a couple of these long distances. I've driven New York to Wisconsin for a meet in there. I've driven down to Florida in one with another friend of mine. I mean, tons of mileage on it, and it just goes. I mean, that's what they're made for. They're made for cruising 70, 80, 90 miles an hour. You sit back and it's that five-speed transmission and air conditioning's going and it's just a wonderful cruising car. Another customer of mine just bought one last summer and he's been driving it around the Hamptons. And one of the things that he asked me to do was just make sure that the suspension is working and that because he was going to load up people and take people to dinner and stuff. And he loves the car. It's like the perfect dinner party car because think about it. You're out in the Hamptons, you're out there on a summer evening and you're going to take, you and two couples to dinner. Well, let's take the Ferrari and you roll in. I mean, you just got to imagine how cool that would be to roll into some hot Hamptons restaurant in your 365 and you get out with 4 of you. It's the perfect car. He loves it. It's just like I got this is like I got to get another one of these things. I love it so much, So it's a cool car, and roll into it. What could be bad about rolling into a place with a 365, with 4 people comfortably coming out of it. It's not like a Porsche where you're trying to you're trying to squeeze somebody into the back seat. These are really, I wouldn't drive across. Some people have driven across the country in these things with 4 people, but the thing is, you could easily sit in the back and not, do a 20-minute drive and not completely be folded up in one of these things. You can actually sit back there for an hour or so and use it. So it's a real 2+2. It's not like the Porsche definition or the modern like a Mustang 2+2. It's just these kind of like funny little seats that they count as a real seat. They're real seats in the back. So that's another car that I think is great. It's a little long. It's the longest car I've worked on, but once you get used to them, they're really fun to drive.
And just from an estimate perspective, they must be in slightly different condition. We have one that's the 69 is 225 to 250. So like you said, much more reasonable. And then the 1970 is 275 to 325. So it must be condition related. Yeah.
Right. And they're all over the place. I mean, if you don't make the auction here, you could still find them every once in a while. Obviously buy the best one you can. Ferraris are expensive when they're not well taken care of. So it's always better to pay a little bit more. And I think you really shouldn't try to buy something in under the 2s. I mean, definitely in the 2s, because I've seen, and I get hired out to do inspections on these cars. And I look at stuff that's, to save $20,000, you're going to burn through $20,000 in a blink of an eye fixing those things that are neglected. So it's always better to get a better car if you can.
Right. Okay. Well, do we have one left or we have 2 left?
We have one left, which is, we kind of touched on it earlier, which is the Dino.
Oh, sure.
Who doesn't like the Dino? I mean, it's just, it's ironic. It's like the Speedster, right? It's the cheap car that no one wanted, and now everybody wants everybody wants a Speedster and everybody wants a Dino. I mean, for people, and I'm actually surprised. I start to date myself, I guess, because. And maybe sometimes it's people who just don't know cars that much, but to refresh people's memory, Dino is to Ferrari as what Scion is to Toyota. Toyota created Scion to kind of like, make a lower brand for an entry level into the Toyota market. They wanted to get young people to buy them and eventually they would sell their, XD or whatever and buy a Corolla or a Camry or something like that. But like a Dino was kind of like Ferrari wasn't making, they had this great engine. They had this great little Formula 2 motor, that the V6 motor that they had developed. And they wanted to put it in a car, but they didn't want to soil the name of Ferrari because they were basically selling, V12 cars. They were known for V12s. And so they created Dino to create this brand and badge it as a Dino with no Ferrari badges on at all, to sell it as Dino through the Ferrari dealership, but it wasn't sold as a Ferrari. Kind of a marketing problem because they couldn't sell them, so they started putting Ferrari badges on them, and people started buying them. But
they did start putting Ferrari badges on them. Is that true?
I think that's what I heard. It's like, and I don't know if it was from the factory. I think what happened was they were sitting on dealer lots and they couldn't sell them. So why not just go and get a Ferrari badge and put it on there? So they didn't explain that it was a Ferrari. I mean, I think that was some of it. Some of the people just bought them and then put Ferrari badges on them. So it's might be a little bit of folklore and logic to it. If a dealer can't sell a car, well, what is he going to do to get it sold? Paint it red or put a Ferrari badge on it. So that's kind of what they did. But it's a great little car. I mean, I said, like I said earlier, there's something universally attractive to a Dino. I mean, it has a great shape. It's low. It handles really well. It engages you. When I first started driving Dinos, I used to say, "Oh man, it needs like 50 more horsepower." It just doesn't. It felt a little gutless. But in reality of it all, it wasn't the car. It was me. You have to kind of step up a little bit. You have to think a little bit when you're driving a Dino. You need to actually get the revs in the right place. You need to be in the right gear.
Right.
You need to think ahead about driving it. And what that does is when you succeed at doing that with a Dino, it pays you back because it actually comes through the turn perfectly, and it gives you just the right amount of feel as you're on the power. But if you screw it up, it just doesn't have it. And sometimes with more powerful cars, you don't notice the lack of talent because the power makes up all the difference. But the Dino kind of makes you work a little bit more for it. And I think that it's a different car. I mean, everybody wants these huge horsepower cars, but anybody could put their foot down and hold on.
Yeah.
But like a Dino on a Sunday morning when there's no traffic and you got the windows open, you're hearing that little V6 really likes to spin up, and it makes all the right noises. I think about back, my first drive in a 246 GTS. I didn't get into my previous career, but I used to work for Letterman, and Letterman let me drive his 246 GTS, and that was like my first drive in a Dino. And man, I tell you, the vivid memory of me driving down Beverly Boulevard in LA from TV City and rolling to the gears and just that click 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 sound of the little shifter and that little noise coming out of the back of the engine, the cam noise, and I was hooked. I was just like, man, this is it. This is where it is, and that's when I really said that I get it now. This is what people love Dinos.
So it's funny, you're the actual second guest of mine that worked for David Letterman and drove his Dino.
Oh yeah.
So can you tell me first? The other one was Spike Ferriston. Can you tell me?
Oh yeah, I know Spike.
Yeah. So tell me, what did you do for Dave?
I was an audio engineer. So
okay.
I did audio for my career. My previous life was I was a television. I started working for CBS out of school. I went to art school, but ended up working for CBS Inc. And then when Letterman came to CBS, I was selected to be on the crew and did audio. So I did all the band stuff. I worked with all the rock bands and set up. And then I used to say, like, if you see a microphone on somebody in the 12 years that I worked for Letterman, I had something to do with that. So I had to go up and meet all the guests and put microphones on and set up the rock bands and stuff. So it was a lot of fun. I mean, I did that for 12 years. And so Letterman and I would talk about cars all the time. And the same thing, Spike and Seinfeld and we all have our car buddies that we on downtime. We're just it doesn't matter who it is that you're talking to. If you're a car guy, I'm going to talk to you about it. So the crew would roll their eyes because it was like, oh boy, here we go, Tom and Dave, car talk. And we would talk about cars. So that's how. And Dave was generous enough, when there was an opportunity that he let me drive his cars, and it was a lot of fun. A lot of fun.
Does Dave still have his Dino?
Yes, he does.
Okay. Well, this particular car we have in the auction, I've looked it up, is a beautiful red with tan interior. I know that's not the right phrasing for either one of those colors, but it is a chairs and flares. So if you would tell our listeners a little bit about that option.
Sure. So chairs and flares, they put wider tires on it, and the chairs are Daytona. So what happened was in 72, 71, when they came out with the Daytona, they had these special seats that they put in a Daytona. So it became an option that they were able to buy that as an option and put that in a Dino. So it basically was a Daytona seat, and the flares were just to put a wider tire. Personally, I mean, this might sound blasphemous because everybody pays more money for chairs and flares because it's all chairs and flares, chairs and flares, chairs and flares. But there's a small movement of Dino people who actually like the non-flared cars because the flare, when you really look at it, almost looks like an afterthought. I mean, it almost looks like just this curve of steel that they just added so that it would, I'm sure there's motor vehicles, laws that you can't have the tires further out than the body. But how are you going to change the body of the Dino? Like you can't. I mean, without having it look like an aftermarket kit. So they just put this like rolled flat lip that just looks like a piece of steel that just goes down. That's the flare. It's like, boy, that's really not a creative flare, but it brings all the money. Everybody wants chairs and flares. They want the Daytona seats, and the Daytona seats are definitely a little bit more comfortable. They're kind of cool, but the flares, well, it's a personal taste, but it has become this catchphrase of Dinos. Everybody wants the chairs and flares, but it does turn out that not everyone needs to have chairs and flares. Is it that much better of a Dino? I think Dinos, you're missing the point if you think that the wider tires on a Dino is going to transform that car. It's a wonderful car regardless of how it's set up.
Yeah, and I did post a picture as you were talking of what the chairs or the flares look like from the front, and boy, they really do, very noticeable when you're looking at it directly from the front of the car. So that is interesting. That's a really good point. So the number on this car, because it's chairs and flares, is 550 to 650, and I'm looking at the pictures here, and this car is immaculate. That's one of the nicest ones I've seen, at least from pictures, in a long time. Yeah. So would you call that top of market there, 550 to 600, or you feel like that's
it's probably, I mean, I think the 600 is getting close to the top of the market. I mean, Dinos are, it's funny. I always watch Dino prices because it's kind of like when I bought that 330 America, Dinos have always been like the same, almost right around the same price. So when it was always watching those because it was like, did I make the right choice? Did I buy I bought my V12 because I wanted a V12. I didn't want a 6-cylinder car. But the thing is, it's always funny. You're watching the prices. So yeah, I think that it's strong these days. That price is stronger than what, let's say, a 2+2 V12 Ferrari is. But it's probably about right. I think the market it's kind of funny. The market is very unpredictable these days because some cars are exploding and some cars are lagging. Like I said, usually they kind of all keep up with each other. And why is the GTCs? GTCs at one point when Dinos were $500,000, GTCs were $700,000. Right. Well, right now Dinos are back to $500,000. Why are the GTCs still languishing down in the fives? They haven't caught up. So sometimes if you're right on the market, you might be able to buy something before it catches up. Then all of a sudden it becomes the sleeper car that came out. So I think the 246 GTS Dino is always going to be popular. It may be it's the bellwether. That's the one that's setting the market right now. So it's probably right. I mean, there's a lot of car for, in a collection. No one is going to ask you why you own a Dino in your collection. If you're putting a collection of cars together, I don't see why a Dino isn't in your collection.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, it has become known as one of the prettiest, most balanced handling, driving cars out there, especially from a Ferrari perspective. Yeah. And
it's certainly cheaper than a Lusso.
Yeah, that's true. What are Lussos now? 2.5, 3.5?
I just, a customer of mine just got one for the high ones, but they're in the high ones to twos. But some of the nice ones are twos, but the problem when they're asking twos is it's got to be damn near perfect. Yeah. I mean, in between the 1.6 and 1.9 area of price, there's a lot of movement, and I think that's where they're pricing. When someone's asking all the money, which is the 1.9 to 2, which was the high mark previously, let's say 5 years ago, I think it needs to be perfect. The reason being is to make a 1.5 car into a $2 million car. You got to spend $500,000, if not more, to basically start all over. So if if he was asking $2 million, I don't want to have to fix anything. I don't want to have to redo the chrome. I don't want to have to redo the seats. I don't want to do anything, because that's all the money. I could take a 1.5 car and make that with a $500,000. But it's just about what you're paying for. Yes, buy the best you can. If I wanted to take a car to Cavallino or some people say the Lucas are too pedestrian for Pebble Beach, but let's say you want to take it to Concorso Italiano or something, you want to win a platinum. That's what you'd have to be looking for, is a perfect car at $2 million.
Yeah, I agree with that. Well, I appreciate your time today talking Ferraris. What's the best way for our listeners to learn more about you? And I don't know, maybe they want to reach out to have their Ferrari worked on.
Yeah, well, if I have the time. But yeah, I have a whole bunch of ways. You can find me. Most of it is tomyang.net, which is my website. Like I said, I pronounce it Yang, but it is spelled Yang. So it's tomyang.net, and also YouTube stuff. The same thing. If you look up my name, tomyang.net on YouTube, I've got a little YouTube channel, not a big one, but it deals with just vintage Ferrari. I'm not surprised I'm not setting the YouTube world on fire, because it's not a ton of people who give a crap about the inner workings of a vintage Ferrari. But that's kind of like what I've been doing. It's just, I want to pull the curtain aside. Enough of these driving pictures and these cliches about vintage Ferraris. This is the nitty gritty. This is the stuff where you get your hands dirty and you actually take stuff apart and you can actually see what makes them tick. That's awesome. That's great. And I'll put all these links in the description so folks can find you. So thanks again, Tom, for being on the Collector Car Podcast. My pleasure. And I'll see you out there.
Thanks for listening to the Collector Car Podcast. Don't forget to give us a nice rating on iTunes, and be sure to follow us on Instagram and everywhere else at the Collector Car Podcast.